The evening sky draped over the quiet town of Willow Creek like a velvet curtain, stars just beginning to pierce the deep indigo. Claire sat on her porch, a glass of Merlot in hand, her gaze lost in the stillness of the suburban street. The cul-de-sac was peaceful, the kind of place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries but kept their secrets close. Her husband, Gregory, was already asleep upstairs, his steady snores a familiar soundtrack to her nights. 17 years of marriage had carved a comfortable routine, but comfort, Claire had begun to realize, could feel like a slow suffocation. Across the street, the Walker's house glowed softly, its windows casting warm light onto the manicured lawn. Their son Liam had returned home after college, now 23, a young man with a quiet intensity that hadn't been there when he was a boy, racing his skateboard down the pavement. Claire remembered those days, his laughter echoing through the neighborhood. Now he was different, taller, broader, with eyes that seemed to see through the polite facades people wore. Their first real conversation happened on a warm Tuesday afternoon. Claire was kneeling in her garden, her hands buried in the cool earth, when Liam strolled over his shadow, falling across her. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. She laughed, brushing dirt from her palms. "I've got this, but thanks." He didn't leave. Instead, he crouched beside her, pulling weeds with a focus that surprised her. They talked about the neighborhood, his time away at college, the strange limbo of being back home. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Do you ever feel stuck?" Claire froze, her fingers tightening around a dandelion. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time in years she'd spoken that truth aloud. That small confession cracked something open. Over the weeks, their encounters grew frequent, deliberate. Liam would appear when she was watering the roses, offering a shy smile and a cup of coffee he'd made too much of. Their conversations were effortless, charged with a warmth Claire hadn't felt in years. He listened, really listened, his hazel eyes locked on hers, as if she were the only person in the world. Gregory, with his predictable routines and distracted glances, hadn't looked at her like that in a decade. Liam saw her, the woman beneath the wife, the mother, the keeper of the household, and that gaze was intoxicating. Claire didn't mean to drift. She told herself it was innocent, just neighborly chats. But she began seeking him out, baking extra blueberry muffins to drop off at the Walkers, asking for his help with trivial tasks like moving a heavy planter. Each interaction left her pulse racing, her skin tingling with an awareness she thought she'd buried long ago. She started wearing tighter jeans, letting her hair fall loose instead of pinning it up, noticing how Liam's eyes lingered on the curve of her hips or the bare skin of her shoulders. The air between them crackled, unspoken, but undeniable. One humid evening, Claire sat on her porch steps, the wine glass cool against her palm. The street was silent, the only sound the faint chirp of crickets. Liam emerged from his house, leaning against the mailbox, his silhouette sharp against the streetlight. Without a word, he crossed the street and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. They didn't speak at first, just shared the quiet, the night wrapping around them like a secret. "What are you afraid of?" Claire asked, her voice soft, the wine loosening her tongue. Liam's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Waking up one day and realizing I've lived someone else's life." His words hit her like a punch, echoing her own buried fears. She didn't respond, but her heart pounded, her fingers tightening around the glass. That night changed everything. Their talks grew longer, their silences heavier, laced with a tension that made Claire's breath catch. She caught herself watching him, his broad shoulders, the way his hands moved with quiet confidence, the faint stubble along his jaw. She knew it was dangerous, knew she was teetering on the edge of something forbidden. Gregory began to notice her distraction, his questions sharper, his eyes lingering a little too long. "Where were you this afternoon?" He'd ask, his tone casual but probing. Claire lied, hating herself for it, but unable to stop. She wasn't ready to face what those lies meant. Then came the day at the grocery store. Claire was scanning the produce aisle when Teresa Walker, Liam's mother, appeared, her cart filled with vegetables. They exchanged small talk, the usual neighborly pleasantries. As they parted, Teresa paused her smile, warm but pointed. Liam says you've been a good friend to him. Says you make him feel grounded. The word friend lodged in Claire's chest like a splinter. It should have reassured her, but instead it underscored how deeply she'd let herself fall. That night alone in her bathroom, Claire stared at her reflection. Her hazel eyes, once dulled by routine, now burned with a restless fire. She was 43, married a pillar of her community, yet here she was, unraveling over a boy she'd known since he was a child. The moment of no return came on a quiet afternoon. The doorbell rang, and there was Liam holding a ceramic dish she'd left at his house. "Thought you'd want this back," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes searching. Claire took the dish, her fingers brushing his, a spark igniting at the contact. She started to close the door, but he didn't move. "I need to say something," he said, his voice low, raw. "You're the only person who really sees me right now, and I don't want to lose that." Claire's heart thundered, her mind screaming to shut the door to end this before it consumed her. But her body betrayed her. She stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on the couch inches apart, the air thick with unspoken desire. Liam didn't touch her, didn't need to. His gaze was enough heavy with a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "I don't know what this is," he said, his voice trembling. "But it's real." Claire's breath hitched her hands, clenching the edge of the cushion. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, to feel his lips on hers, his hands on her skin. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, "It's real for me too." The admission hung between them, a line crossed, a promise made. The days that followed were a dance of restraint and temptation. Claire's thoughts were consumed by Liam, the way his shirt clung to his chest after mowing the lawn, the low timbre of his laugh, the heat in his eyes when they locked on hers. She started wearing low-cut tops, letting the straps of her camisole slip off her shoulder, watching how his breath caught when she leaned close to hand him a glass of iced tea. One evening, alone in her kitchen, she sent him a text, a suggestive photo of her in a silk robe, the neckline plunging just enough to tease. "Oops" meant that for a friend, she typed, her heart racing as she hit send. Liam's reply was a single word, "Wow." But the heat in that word set her skin ablaze. Gregory's suspicions grew, his questions more pointed. "You're different," he said one night over dinner, his fork pausing mid-air. "What's going on with you, Claire?" Forced a smile, her stomach twisting. "Just tired, I guess." But the lie tasted bitter, and she hated how easily it came. She tried to pull back, avoiding Liam focusing on her marriage. She cooked Gregory's favorite meals, suggested movie nights, even initiated sex for the first time in months. But it felt hollow, like she was performing a role she no longer believed in. Then came the afternoon by the park. Liam had texted her a simple coffee. Claire met him under a sprawling oak, the public setting, a thin shield against their growing intimacy. They sat close, their knees brushing the air, heavy with unspoken words. "I'm thinking of leaving," Liam said, suddenly his voice low. "Getting some space." Claire's heart plummeted. Why, she asked, her voice barely steady. He looked at her, his eyes raw. "Because this hurts, and I don't want to hurt you." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You haven't," she whispered. But they both knew the truth. They were already hurting, caught in a web of longing neither could escape. Liam left 2 days later, his car packed for a vague trip to visit a friend. Claire watched from her window, her chest tight as he drove away. A part of her shattered, but another part felt relief. A chance to reclaim her life, her marriage, herself. She threw herself into distractions, volunteering, hosting barbecues, trying to be the wife Gregory deserved. But Liam's absence was a constant ache, a ghost that lingered in every quiet moment. She'd catch herself reaching for her phone, wanting to text him to hear his voice. Each time the silence cut deeper. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived, postmarked from Oregon. Liam's handwriting was unmistakable, her name scrawled across the envelope, with a care that made her heart skip. Inside, his words were simple but piercing. He was okay, missed their talks, hoped she was well. At the bottom, he wrote, "Some people come into our lives to wake us up. Doesn't mean we get to keep them." Claire read it until the words blurred, then tucked it into her journal, a keepsake of a moment she couldn't let go. Life moved on. Seasons shifted, and Claire tried to rebuild. She and Gregory found a tentative rhythm. Friday dinners, evening walks, small gestures that felt like a bridge back to each other. One night as they watched an old movie, Gregory took her hand. "I see you," he said, his voice soft. "I really do." Claire's throat tightened, her eyes meeting his. "I see you too," she whispered, and for the first time in months, she meant it. But Liam remained a quiet flame in her heart, not a regret, but a reminder of what it felt like to be truly seen. A year passed each day, a step toward reclaiming the life Claire had chosen. She was more present now, not just for Gregory, but for herself. She started painting again, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago, letting colors spill across canvases in bursts of emotion she couldn't voice. She joined a yoga class, feeling her body awaken, with each stretch reclaiming a strength she'd forgotten. Her marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real again, built on small, deliberate choices to stay, to see, to love. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, Claire wandered through the Willow Creek Farmers Market, the air rich with the scent of fresh bread and cider. She hadn't been there in months, avoiding the memories tied to the place. Today, though, she felt ready, her heart lighter than it had been in ages. She was reaching for a bundle of lavender when a voice stopped her cold. "Claire." Her breath caught and she turned slowly. There was Liam. His hair longer, a faint scruff on his jaw, his eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who'd lived through something transformative. "Hi," she managed, her voice trembling. "Hi, Liam." They stood frozen, the bustling market fading into a hum. Then instinctively, they hugged, a brief, gentle embrace that carried the weight of their shared history. They moved to a bench at the market's edge, away from the crowds, and sat in the quiet they'd always shared so easily. "I didn't expect to see you," Claire said, her voice steadier now. "Just in town for a few days," Liam replied, his smile soft. "Visiting my parents. Last-minute trip." They talked, catching up on the surface, his new job, her painting the changes in their small town. But the undercurrent was there, the unspoken truth of what they'd been to each other. "I never wrote back," Claire said finally, her voice low. "To your letter." Liam's smile was gentle understanding. "I didn't expect you to. Some things are better left where they belong." She nodded, her chest tight with gratitude for his grace, his wisdom beyond his years. They sat longer than they meant to, the conversation flowing then, pausing in those familiar silences that said more than words ever could. "I don't regret it," Claire said suddenly, her voice firm. "Any of it." Liam's eyes met hers, steady and warm. "I don't either. You taught me more than you know." They hugged again, a lingering embrace this time, not out of longing but closure. When Liam walked away, Claire felt no ache, no loss, only peace. That night, Claire sat on her porch, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands, the stars bright above. She thought of Liam, of Gregory, of the woman she'd been, and the one she was becoming. Gregory returned the next day, his arms wrapping around her in the doorway. "I missed you," he said, his voice tired but sincere. "I missed you too," Claire replied, and the words felt true, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. Their marriage grew stronger, not through grand gestures, but quiet, intentional moments. They laughed, more touched, more shared stories they'd forgotten to tell. Claire started wearing lingerie again, not for Gregory, but for herself, reveling in the silk against her skin, the way it made her feel alive. One night, as they lay in bed, Gregory's hand found hers. "I know I'm not always good with words," he said, "but I see you, Claire. I always have." She squeezed his hand, tears prickling her eyes. "I see you too," she whispered, and this time she saw herself as well. Liam's letter remained tucked in an old book, a relic of a chapter that had reshaped her. It wasn't about betrayal, not really. It was about awakening, about the messy, beautiful complexity of being human. Claire hadn't crossed the physical line, but her heart had wandered, and that was enough to teach her what she needed to know. She'd chosen to stay, not out of obligation, but desire, a desire to build, to grow, to love, with eyes wide open. If you asked Claire today if she'd cheated, she'd say no, her voice steady. But she'd admit her emotions had strayed, that she'd stood at the edge of something dangerous and felt its pull. The real story wasn't about the line she didn't cross, but what she did after, how she turned inward, faced her needs, and chose her life anew. Love, she'd learned, wasn't a single moment or a perfect state. It was a choice made every day to see and be seen, to stumble and rise, to hold tight to what mattered most. And Claire made that choice with a heart that burned brighter than ever.